Wow. That is not good.
Motor's not repairable as it is. We can't hone it. This is going to require essentially a rebuild of virtually.
FantomWorks was canceled in 2019, and the explanation for it didn't sit right with a lot of people. At the center of FantomWorks was Dan Short, a former military officer who built a reputation on doing restoration work the hard and correct way. But when the show ended after 9 seasons, the network gave one version of events, Dan gave another, and fans were left trying to piece together what actually happened. So what really caused FantomWorks to end? And what has Dan Short been doing since the cameras stopped rolling? Join us as we uncover what happened to FantomWorks and whether the shop is still running today. The origin of FantomWorks. Before there was a television show that people got obsessed with, there was just a man in Norfolk, Virginia, who had spent his career in the United States Army and had spent every spare hour he had in that career working on classic cars. Dan Short grew up loving vehicles the way some people grow up loving a sport or a piece of music. His first significant car encounter was with a 1967 Chevrolet Camaro, the very first model year of that iconic nameplate, which he fell in love with as a teenager and eventually bought. He could not afford to pay anyone to restore it for him, so he taught himself how to do it. That self-taught process became a passion that stayed with him through everything else his life demanded. He served in the U.S. Army, working in engineering and program management, and he brought the discipline and precision of military work into the way he thought about restoring cars. When he retired from service in 2006, he did not hesitate about what came next. He founded DRS Automotive FantomWorks in Norfolk, Virginia, using his military background in engineering and program management to build a company built around precision and the kind of quality that could not be rushed. The shop described itself as the largest auto restoration shop in the United States, and the quality of the work it produced made that claim feel like a fact rather than marketing. His wife, Melissa Short, worked alongside him from the beginning, handling human resources and special projects while keeping the day-to-day operation organized. The team they built around them included restoration technicians, operations managers, and support staff who shared Dan's commitment to doing things properly rather than quickly. The shop took on classic cars, muscle cars, antiques, and family heirlooms with equal care, and it built a reputation in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia that eventually reached further than any regional shop could usually expect. Television found the shop because the work was impossible to ignore. Producers who came across what Dan's team was producing recognized something that the camera was going to communicate naturally. This was a real shop doing real work, not a performance of a shop designed for entertainment. And in 2013, FantomWorks debuted on Velocity Network with a first episode that restored a 1963 Chevrolet Corvette and a Ford Model A hot rod. The audience response confirmed what the producers had seen. The show had found its people immediately. But what made the show different from everything else? Why FantomWorks stood out? FantomWorks obviously operated in a crowded field. By 2013, automotive reality television had been running for years and had produced a range of shows that covered everything from the high-budget, high-drama world of Gas Monkey Garage to the more subdued expertise of wheeler dealers. The audience for this kind of content was real and large, but it was also increasingly experienced and increasingly good at spotting when a show was not being straight with them. Dan Short's show survived that scrutiny because it genuinely was what it appeared to be. The restorations, challenges, and cost discussions were real. Also, the conflicts between Dan and his customers, which provided whatever drama the show contained, were real in the sense that they came from Dan's absolute refusal to do anything that compromised the quality of the work or the integrity of the restoration. The show's tagline, delivered at the opening of every episode, said something like, "If we have to choose between you and your car, we are not choosing you." That line made some viewers laugh, made some viewers uncomfortable, and made a specific subset of viewers immediately loyal to the show, because those were the people who understood that any restorer worth paying was going to prioritize the car's needs over the customer's preferences when those two things conflicted. That willingness to say something most businesses would never say out loud in front of a camera was the thing that made the show feel honest. The crew that appeared on screen alongside Dan were actual employees of the shop doing their actual jobs. Nobody was performing or creating drama for the benefit of the camera. The educational content in every episode was genuine, with Dan and his technicians explaining specific techniques, identifying specific problems, and walking viewers through the logic of restoration decisions in a way that respected the audience's intelligence. Regular viewers learned real things by watching the show, which is not something you can say about most automotive television. The show ran for 9 seasons on Velocity, and then Motor Trend Network, producing 76 episodes and building a fan base that was fiercely loyal and deeply resistant to the idea of losing what they had found. The comments sections of automotive forums and fan pages during the cancellation period are full of people who canceled their Motor Trend subscriptions specifically because of the loss of FantomWorks. That is the kind of audience loyalty that most shows never generate. Then the first sign of trouble showed up, and it was far from subtle. It was huge. The lawsuit that hit before the show even started. Before the first episode of FantomWorks ever aired, the shop was already dealing with a legal situation that would have broken most businesses before they had a chance to build a television presence around themselves. In 2012, a couple named the Owens brought a 1960 Ford Thunderbird to FantomWorks for restoration into a Thunderbird police interceptor, with new suspension and fuel and engine systems. The initial estimate for the job was around $40,000. The Owens paid $30,000 in separate installments and approved a purchase of a donor police interceptor for $6,000. They then requested additional interior improvements. At some point, they became suspicious that the donor car had been purchased for less than the stated price and demanded detailed documentation of all purchases Dan had made in the process of the project. Dan stopped the work while waiting to resolve the documentation dispute. The Owens filed a lawsuit against Dan and FantomWorks, alleging breach of contract and fraud. The case dragged through the legal system for 2 years. Dan maintained that the allegations were financially motivated and represented an attack on his business and his reputation. The lawsuit concluded in 2014, and Dan's name was cleared. The case was resolved in his favor. But 2 years of active litigation, while simultaneously trying to build a television show, is not a small thing to absorb. It meant that the period during which FantomWorks was establishing itself on Velocity was also the period during which Dan was managing legal pressure, public uncertainty about the allegations, and the personal and professional stress that comes from having your integrity questioned in a public forum. The fact that the show survived that period and went on to produce 6 more seasons after the lawsuit concluded says something real about the quality of the foundation underneath it. The lawsuit was resolved. The show continued. And for the next several years, Dan Short and his crew restored cars and built an audience that genuinely cared about what they were watching. But underneath all of that, pressures were building that eventually became impossible to manage. The real reason FantomWorks ended. When Motor Trend Network posted the cancellation of FantomWorks after Season 9, the public reaction was immediate and extremely one-sided. Thousands of fans expressed anger at the network, canceling subscriptions and posting messages on every available platform demanding that the decision be reversed. The universal assumption was that the network had made a stupid decision by dropping a well-loved, highly watchable show. The reality was considerably more complicated. Dan Short posted a detailed explanation on the FantomWorks website in December 2018, titled "Why DRS Quit." And what he described was not a story of a network making a unilateral decision against his wishes. It was a story of a man who had been quietly drowning for years and had finally reached the point where continuing was no longer something he was willing to do. Dan revealed that, by the end of the show's run, the production had put him approximately $1 million in debt. He did not receive financial compensation for appearing on the show in the way that most viewers would assume. The show generated no income for him personally that offset the costs it created, and those costs were real and substantial. Filming 5 to 6 days a week in an active restoration shop means that the cameras are competing with the actual work for time and space, and managing that competition over years of continuous production takes a toll on every aspect of the business. The staffing situation became one of the most serious problems. As the show grew more popular, the people working in the shop began to understand that the television exposure had value, and some of them wanted that value reflected in their pay. Dan described being approached by former employees and third parties expecting large bonus payments and reverse sponsorship arrangements from money that did not exist. He was, as he put it in his own words, doing favors on his knees to keep people working for him. Employees started leaving because the demands of filming combined with the shop's financial pressures made the environment unsustainable, and replacing skilled restoration technicians in the middle of an active television production is not a simple problem. The emotional toll was just as significant as the financial one. Dan described missing the final days of his father's life because the filming schedule made it impossible for him to step away. When a senior network executive had a long conversation with him and said that if it no longer made sense to continue, it was time to stop, Dan agreed. He wrote on his website that it was time and that he had only one regret, which was saying goodbye to the fans who had supported the shop and the show for 9 years. So the show did not end simply because Motor Trend Network pulled the plug. It ended because the man at the center of it looked at $1 million of debt, a staffing situation that had become unmanageable, and the personal costs of years of filming, and decided that he was done. The network's announcement was the public version of a decision that Dan had already made in private. If the show wasn't canceled, would FantomWorks have thrived in a field with constantly increasing competition? What Motor Trend was becoming and why it mattered. The cancellation of FantomWorks did not happen in isolation. It was part of a broader set of changes happening to Motor Trend Network and its parent companies that were reshaping automotive television in ways that had nothing to do with any individual show's quality or popularity. The Motor Trend Network is currently part of the Warner Bros. Discovery family of media channels. Warner Bros. Merged with Discovery in 2022, and in the spring of 2024, all existing Motor Trend streaming content was moved from the dedicated Motor Trend platform to Discovery Plus and Max. Motor Trend Studios, which was the division responsible for producing original content, stopped production entirely in late 2024. Multiple show hosts and creators, including the teams behind Roadkill, Garage Squad, Hot Rod Garage, and Full Custom Garage, announced publicly that their productions had ceased. The streaming consolidation that absorbed Motor Trend content into Discovery Plus and Max was not a vote of confidence in the automotive content category. It was a cost-cutting measure by a large media company managing debt and restructuring its portfolio of channels and platforms. The shows that survived the transition did so because they were produced independently of Motor Trend Studios, not because the network had a clear strategy for what automotive content should look like going forward. FantomWorks had already been canceled years before this broader industry shakeup arrived, which in a strange way meant that Dan Short had made his exit before the landscape around him collapsed more completely. He had left on his own terms, under his own circumstances, before the platform that had hosted his show went through changes that would have created a whole new set of uncertainties, even for a show that was still in production. However, FantomWorks is still open in 2026. The shop continued operating throughout the years since the television cameras left, and it continues to operate as of 2026 in exactly the way that Dan promised it would when he announced the show was ending. DRS Automotive FantomWorks in Norfolk, Virginia, is still taking in classic cars, still restoring them to a standard that reflects everything the show demonstrated about how the shop operates, and still running the weekly tours that had been a feature of the shop long before any television producer ever walked through the door. The shop describes its services as affordable, built on superior quality craftsmanship, and delivered by passionate professionals, which is the same language Dan used to describe the business when he founded it in 2006. The debt that the show left behind has been the most significant ongoing challenge. $1 million is a substantial financial hole to climb out of from a restoration shop in Norfolk, Virginia, regardless of how good the work is and how loyal the customer base is. Dan has not provided detailed public updates on the financial recovery process, which is entirely his prerogative, but the fact that the shop has remained open and operational for 6 years since the show's cancellation suggests that the recovery has been real, even if it has been slow. Dan has also expanded into YouTube content, which provides the shop and its work with ongoing visibility that does not require the financial arrangements and scheduling demands that television imposed. The FantomWorks YouTube channel gives fans of the show a way to stay connected with what is happening at the shop, and it gives Dan a platform that he controls directly without a network in between. His wife Melissa remains part of the operation, and several members of the original crew who appeared on the show are still working at the shop. The core of what made FantomWorks the business it was before the cameras arrived, the technical skill, the commitment to quality, and the refusal to do work that did not meet the shop's standards, has not changed because the show ended. Fans who have visited the shop in the years since the cancellation report that it operates exactly as the show portrayed it. Looking back after leaving television, does Dan Short regret the FantomWorks show? Dan Short's career regrets. Dan Short at 60-something is not a man who appears to be spending much energy looking backward at what the television years cost him. The public statements he has made since the show ended reflect someone who made a difficult decision, accepted the consequences of it, and moved forward with the same directness that defined his approach to everything else in his professional life. He has acknowledged in a video from 2023 that the financial compensation he received for appearing on television for 6 years was effectively zero. The exposure and the opportunity to show the world what his shop could do was real. However, the debt was also real, which is the part that the television industry tends not to advertise when it comes looking for interesting businesses to put on screen. What he also said, in the same blog post where he described the cost of the show, was that he was honored to meet thousands of viewers during shop tours, at car shows, and at national events. He said he had traveled internationally and been genuinely moved by how many people expressed love for the shop and the show. The separation between the financial reality of the television arrangement and the genuine human connection the show created is something he has held with clarity rather than bitterness. His military background also had an impact in how he handled both the highs and the lows of the television years. The discipline, the honesty, and the willingness to say what was true, even when what was true was uncomfortable, are all qualities that the Army cultivates in people who thrive in it. And they are also all qualities that made FantomWorks the show that it was. The man you saw on screen was the actual man. Nothing about him was constructed for the camera. As of 2026, Dan Short is a business owner in Norfolk, Virginia, who restored classic cars before television found him, restored them while television was filming him, and has continued restoring them after television moved on. The shop is open. The work is happening. And the audience that fell in love with what he built has not forgotten about it, which is why people are still asking these questions 6 years after the last episode aired. Did you watch FantomWorks during its original run? And did you know the full story of why Dan Short walked away from the show? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.